I saw him dragging a Doberman puppy with his car. You won't believe how it ends. How could I even begin to describe the horror of seeing a 4-month-old Doberman puppy tied to the rear bumper of a car and dragged across the blistering asphalt of Flagstaff? It was the kind of scene you only expect from a cheap horror film, the kind you brush off by telling yourself, no one in the real world is that cruel. But I saw it, stared straight into it, straight into the heart of it, and it crushed me from the inside out. I had always believed people were good at their core, that darkness was just an exception born from a few broken souls, that no one could look into the trusting, trembling eyes of a puppy, eyes made only for waiting, loving, believing, and choose to harm it. I wanted to believe that with everything in me, but the truth that faced me that day was a truth I never wanted to meet. Some hearts really are empty rooms where compassion was evicted long ago. Roy Maddox was one of those people. I recognized his voice before I ever saw him, that guttural rasp dragging out of his throat the morning curses that followed the clatter of an empty beer can hitting the yard, the slam of a truck door, loud enough to jolt the whole neighborhood. But nothing, not even the worst things I imagined about him, prepared me for what I was witnessing now. Not even close. His old blue sedan tore down Pine Canyon Road, the pavement stretching out like a ribbon of hot steel beneath the Arizona sun. Behind the car, Rocco, this tiny black and tan Doberman puppy, small enough to fit between my palms, was being dragged by a coarse rope cinched tight around his fragile neck, his head jerking with every violent jolt, his thin legs scrambling for footing before folding beneath his body. He fell, and the car just kept going. I heard his claws scraping against the asphalt, a sound so brutal it carved straight through my ribs. I heard his skin sliding on the heat-soaked road, a soft, tearing noise like someone ripping wet fabric. I heard his breath hitch, heard that hoarse, broken whine that wasn't loud enough to be a cry for help, but was strong enough to shatter whatever innocence I still had left. The world narrowed to one truth: he was dying right in front of me. My heartbeat slammed like a war drum, my lungs locked. For several seconds I just stood there, frozen in place, nailed to the ground by the sheer violence of what I was seeing. Then I looked at the car's side mirror. I saw Roy Maddox's face. No emotion, no hesitation, not a flicker of anything remotely human. He stared ahead as if he were dragging a piece of trash he planned to toss somewhere along the tree line, and in my skull a voice I didn't recognize erupted with a roar. "You piece of filth! You monster! You damn animal, dressed as a man! I don't speak like that in everyday life." But when I saw Rocco's body skid across the asphalt, those words rose straight out of the darkest part of me. I don't remember when I started running. I don't remember the feel of my feet pounding the ground. I don't remember the heat burning up the back of my neck. I only remember one thing, a truth cold and sharp as a blade. If I didn't stop him, Rocco wouldn't survive another minute. Arizona's dry wind slapped against my face as I sprinted, my heartbeat pounding so loud it drowned everything else. My body hurled itself into the road as if an unseen hand had grabbed me and yanked me forward. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a man looking for trouble. I was just someone who had lived quietly in the woods near Flagstaff for almost a decade. But in that moment, watching that fragile life dragged like a broken object, everything in me, every belief, every rule, every fear burned away in an instant. Only one thing remained. I would save him at any cost. My name is Ethan Caldwell. 48 years old, living on the edge of Flagstaff, where the Arizona pines rise like massive green walls, their shadows stretching across dirt roads marked with old truck tracks and red dust. My life used to be so simple it bordered on dull repairing computers from home, drinking dark roast coffee every morning, mowing the yard on weekends, and sometimes standing outside just to listen to the wind whisper through the treetops like a sad song that never changed its tune. I was never someone who invited trouble. For 10 quiet years here, I hadn't raised my voice at a single soul. People often told me I was too gentle, and maybe they were right because Flagstaff gave me the peace that my old life never could, and I held on to that peace like something sacred. At least until the day Roy Maddox moved into the old house to my left. And everything began to shift. I recognized him by sound long before I ever saw him. The slam of a door echoing into the pines, the crack of a shattered beer can, that harsh rasping laugh tangled up with curses sharp enough to cut the air. When I finally saw him, he had the heavy gait of a man built from knots and anger shoulders wide enough to swallow the narrow road, and eyes so dark it felt like even the sunlight refused to touch them. His house, already worn and weathered, seemed to decay faster once he arrived. The rusted metal roof, the front door screeching on its hinges, the yard sprouting weeds like a forgotten forest. I never heard him greet anyone, never saw him smile, but I heard something else. I heard a dog. At first, it was just startled barking, short, sharp, the kind of sound a confused puppy makes when the world suddenly shifts beneath its feet. The bark sounded small-strained, and I learned later that it belonged to Rocco, a 4-month-old Doberman puppy, so skinny you could see every rib under his black and tan coat. And slowly that barking began to change. It became something no one should ever have to hear. Roy's voice would slice through the air like a blade. "Hey, get over here, stupid mutt!" Then came a heavy thud, like something hitting a wall. Then a whimper, thin as a thread, stretching out so long it made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. Every time that sound slipped through the old wooden fence between our yards, something inside me tightened like a wrench turning on my ribs. I'd grip the handle of my shovel or my mower so hard my knuckles went white. But I never saw anything, only heard it. And in a country full of rules like this one, hearing something isn't enough for anyone to believe you. The police would show up, knock on his door, he'd lie, and the little one would pay the price for me making the call. And I was just a man living alone, someone who didn't know how to confront anyone, someone who avoided conflict whenever he could. I didn't choose a dramatic life. I chose quiet. But that whimper, that small breaking sound, wrapped itself around my heart like an invisible thread tightening day after day. I started accidentally spending more time in the yard mowing grass that didn't need mowing, fixing a faucet that wasn't leaking anymore, standing beside the fence long enough to memorize every rusted nail in it. Every noise from Roy's yard hit me like a punch. I didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't turn away. One late afternoon, while I was changing the mower blade, I heard something different, something deeper, rougher. A guttural cry, so desperate even the wind through the pines seemed to stop and listen. It wasn't fear, it was pain, real pain. I stood up, heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. I pressed my ear to the old fence, and through the cold wood, I could hear every trembling breath Rocco took as if he were whispering straight into my skin. And then Roy's voice followed. "You're pissing me off again. Let's see what you learn this time." That was when it hit me. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was a witness to a crime happening less than 15 feet from where I stood. From that moment on, sleep came in pieces. Coffee tasted different. My quiet life no longer felt like mine. Something inside me, some part I thought had died after years of living alone, started to wake up again. A stubborn part. A part that refused to let a small, helpless life be crushed under the hands of a man who had lost whatever humanity he once had. I didn't know what I was going to do. I only knew one thing: I would save Rocco, no matter what it costs me. Even if it meant facing Roy Maddox himself. Even if it meant shattering the peace I had protected for a decade. Because there are things that if you don't stand up and stop them, will haunt you for the rest of your life. That afternoon, the Flagstaff sky sagged like a slab of dull metal hanging low over the pines, the last light slipping through the gaps in the branches and painting long orange strokes across the red dirt. I stood in the backyard, pretending to gather fallen pine limbs, but the truth was simpler than that. I was listening. I was always listening. After weeks of living beside Roy Maddox's personal hell, my ears had learned to separate every sound bleeding through the rotting fence. I knew the thud of him hitting the wall, the roll of another empty beer can, and most clearly the thin, pained breaths of Rocco trying to hold himself together. But today, the sound was different. A small whimper trembling like a thread about to snap. Not fear, not resistance, but the sound of a life preparing to let go. I shot upright, my heart hammering 3 sharp blows into my ribs. My legs pulled me toward the fence before I could think. I pressed my ear to the rough wood sap and old pine dust rising into the air while something darker crept beneath it. Then came the scrape of a chain dragging across concrete, a blunt impact, and a weak, strangled hiss that cut off halfway like a voice being crushed shut. A moment later, Roy's voice broke through, low, cold, stripped of anything human. "You're done. I'm sick of you." I held my breath. My fingers dug so hard into the fence that the wood left grooves in my skin. His voice rose, threading anger and threat through every gap in the boards. "Your life ends tonight. I swear it. I'll drag you far enough to teach you your final lesson. The final lesson." My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I heard Rocco trying to shift, heard the rope grinding against his neck, heard his small paws slipping helplessly across the concrete. He wanted to run, but his body was too weak, like a crushed leaf still trying to cling to the wind. I closed my eyes, and in that instant my mind painted the whole scene: the dirt road leading toward Route 180, Roy's blue sedan, the rusted bumper, the hardened rope, and Rocco, small, powerless, dragged until there was nothing left. When I opened my eyes, Roy spoke the sentence that shattered every last illusion I had left. "Get in the car. I'm tying you to the bumper and dragging you till I'm damn tired." I froze. No more guessing. No more doubt. He was going to kill him. Right now. I pressed my eye to the narrow slit in the fence, seeing nothing but Roy's shadow and the warped dog crate. Yet the sounds told me everything. He was tying the rope, tightening the knots, pulling open the gate. Then a door slammed shut, a metallic clatter, keys hitting the ignition, a faint, broken breath. Rocco. A cold streak crawled down my spine, not from the forest wind, but from one brutal truth. If I didn't act, he'd be dead in 10 minutes. I stepped back, my body going weightless, as if all the blood had drained out and been replaced by adrenaline. My ears rang, leaving only the pounding of my heart like a hammer inside my chest. Then, Roy's engine erupted, the ground trembling beneath it. And I understood. This was the moment I stepped into a fight I couldn't afford to lose. The final fight to save Rocco. I don't remember how I left the backyard, only that when Roy Maddox's engine roared a second time, low, harsh, vicious, like some cornered animal lashing out, my body launched itself toward my old pickup as if pulled by a wire. My heart slammed so hard it felt ready to crack open my ribs, and when I grabbed my keys, my hands shook badly enough that I dropped them once. When my engine finally ignited, the sound felt like a vow. I would save him, or die with him. I killed the headlights, slammed the gas, and shot down the gravel path toward Pine Canyon Road, the Flagstaff night wind stabbing my face like needles. The moment I turned right, I saw Roy's blue sedan, and I saw Rocco. The world collapsed in that single second. His tiny body was dragged behind the car like a shredded rag, the rope cinched so tight around his neck that his head jerked violently every time Roy swerved. I saw his little legs trying to run, too short, too weak, too fragile to keep pace with the cold, merciless asphalt, and within seconds he stumbled and fell flat. His belly scraped directly across the road, red dust bursting into the air, mixing with dark streaks I knew weren't dirt at all. They were blood. A strangled sound crawled out of my throat, but never became a word. A part of me wanted to floor the gas ram Roy's bumper, flip him into the ditch, and end everything right there. But doing that would kill Rocco instantly. I had to stay sharp. I had to stay smart. I had to stay alive long enough to save him. I grabbed my phone, my sweat-slick hands nearly dropping it again. 911, what's your emergency? My voice broke apart. There's a man dragging a Doberman puppy behind his car. Pine Canyon Road toward Route 180. Please, he's going to die. I need the license plate, blue sedan, Arizona plate. 7B4 M91, he's speeding up. Hurry, I'm sending units. Keep a safe distance. Safe. There's nothing safe about watching a living creature torn across the road inch by inch. Roy swung sharply onto the road leading to Route 180, and I knew if he hit the highway the speed would kill Rocco in seconds. I had no choice left. I flicked on my headlights, flashing again and again, then lay on the horn, one long, piercing scream. Roy glanced at the mirror. I saw his head snap back, and then he slammed the brakes. I hit mine too, my tires screeching across the pavement. I had no plan, no weapon, only a handful of minutes to stall for the police. Roy's door flew open like it had been kicked from the inside. He stormed toward me, a heavy mass of fury and rage, and yanked my truck door so hard the hinges groaned under the strain. What the hell is your problem? I swallowed the fire in my throat. I had to become someone else. I had to speak his language. I'm trying to help you, I said, forcing my voice into a calm it didn't have. He froze for a beat. I don't need help. I sighed, trying to sound sympathetic. I had a beagle once, stubborn as hell. I get it. The anger in Roy's eyes softened just enough. He tilted his head, listening. I leaned closer, lowering my voice like a conspirator. I dragged him behind my bike once, slow, just enough so he'd know who was boss. The words made me sick, but they worked. Roy's shoulders eased. He let out a short, filthy laugh. Humph, not bad. Then he said the sentence that dropped my heart straight through my body. This final lesson might just be the end of him. The police weren't there yet. I had to keep the act going. And the darkest part. It was only just beginning when the police came rushing in from both ends of Route 180, the red-blue lights staining the tall pines like bruises. I didn't look at Roy anymore, and I didn't care about his screaming or the way they slammed him onto the hood and cuffed him right there. All I could see was Rocco, a small, broken life lying motionless behind his old sedan. My legs carried me toward him before the officers even cleared the scene. My knees hit the pavement, burning hot, but I felt nothing except the shock twisting through my chest. Rocco breathed in thin, broken bursts like the last flickers of a match, burning down to its final grain of sulfur. His front legs were smeared red. His belly scraped raw, his mouth coated in dust and tar that clung to him like the residue of a nightmare. Hey, little one. My voice trembled like rotten wood. I placed my hand on his head, barely touching him, afraid that even a gentle press might shatter him entirely. He moved the faintest shift, so small I might have imagined it. Then, a tiny whimper slipped out of him, fragile as a breath of wind. I lowered myself until my forehead nearly touched the ground. It's okay. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm right here. A police officer knelt beside me, carefully removing the rope from around Rocco's neck. His hands came away bloody, but his voice stayed calm. You saved him. We heard everything you did on the call. You kept him talking long enough for us to get here. I couldn't answer. My throat locked tight as if an invisible fist had closed around it. A veterinary emergency van pulled up its pale headlights, washing over Rocco's tiny body, making him look even smaller, even more breakable. The doors swung open, and Dr. Lauren Hayes stepped out, hair tied back, gloves snapping on with the practiced speed of someone who had seen far too many scenes like this. "Let me take a look," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes were grave. They lifted Rocco onto a soft pad inside the van. I climbed in without asking, and no one stopped me. Maybe they saw something in my eyes I didn't yet understand. We sped through the dark roads of Flagstaff, the pines standing tall and silent, like black witnesses to the cruelty of human hands. The clinic glowed harshly under neon lights, antiseptic and alcohol burning sharply in the air. Dr. Hayes placed Rocco on a cold steel table and motioned me back. "We'll take care of him. Wait outside." I nodded, but my feet refused to move. I stood there watching them cut away the rope, rinse the tar from his wounds, wrap each torn patch of skin. Every twitch from his tiny body stabbed straight through my chest like a slow-twisting blade. A technician finally guided me toward the waiting room. "I'll come get you when we're done." I sat with my hands pinned between my knees, listening to the wall clock snap through each second, every tick sounding like a countdown to something I wasn't ready to face. Sometimes I stood and paced. Sometimes I froze. Sometimes I stared at my shaking hands and whispered to myself, if I had run 10 seconds slower, he'd be gone. The door swung open. Dr. Hayes stepped out, gloves off, shoulders heavy, but she wore a small, tired smile. "This little guy is a fighter." My chest loosened like something unclamped itself from around my lungs. "How is he?" I asked. My voice cracked and sanded down. "He's hurting, shocked, dehydrated. But no broken bones. We've given fluids, pain meds, and bandages. He needs time." She paused, then added softly, "Do you want to see him?" I didn't answer. I just followed. Rocco lay on a warm pad, his whole body wrapped in white bandages small enough to look like a child swaddled in hospital cloth. I knelt beside him, my hand trembling as I rested it on his head. His eyelids fluttered, and then he opened them, thin, cloudy, but carrying a faint light. Recognition. He looked at me for a single second. Then he nudged his head, just enough to rest it against my hand. One small movement, but it shattered every wall I had left. I exhaled a sound like someone breaking the surface after drowning. A tear slipped down, landing on my hand, before soaking into the fine fur along his temple. In that moment, I knew he wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't a battle anymore. He was my family. Rocco stayed at the clinic for 3 days. 3 long days that stacked on top of each other like 3 winters pressed into my chest. And I barely left the waiting room except to run home, shower, and come back with a fresh cup of dark coffee just to keep myself upright beneath the ticking clock and the too bright neon. On the 4th day, Dr. Hayes said Rocco was stable enough to go home but would need close monitoring, and I nodded before she even finished the sentence. I would do anything, anything. I drove slowly along the forest road toward my cabin, easing over every bump as if the slightest jolt could send him back into pain. My home had never felt so quiet, and never so terrifying. I placed Rocco on the softest blanket I owned, right beside the fireplace and away from the harsh light. His breathing came steady but faint, and his eyes stayed closed, lashes trembling as though he hovered somewhere between life and death, a place he had crossed far too many times in the past week. I sat beside him for hours, just watching, just listening to each breath. And every time that tiny chest rose and fell, the world inside mine settled a little. But that night, his first night home, everything changed. Wind from the Flagstaff pines rattled the windows like anxious fingertips. I had dozed off in the armchair beside him, But when I opened my eyes, I saw Rocco curled tight, his whole body shaking in waves, and when I touched his forehead, I flinched. He was burning. No, buddy. Not now. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as they slid beneath his neck. His breaths were fractured and heavy. His legs tensed, his belly twitching in painful spasms. I called Dr. Hayes at nearly 3 a.m. "Bring him back right now, Ethan," she said, steady on the surface, but I could hear urgency threaded through every word. I wrapped Rocco in a soft blanket and carried him to the truck. He felt so light. Too light. Like all that remained in his small body was a fading breath and a thin scrap of hope. On the drive back, my eyes stung, the streetlights smearing into halos, and my heart hammered so hard it hurt. "Don't leave me, sweetheart," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure he could hear. Inside the clinic, they pushed fluids, lowered his fever, and fitted an oxygen mask. I stood behind the glass with my hands pressed to my forehead, trying to keep myself from coming apart. I had feared many things in my life, but nothing like that night. Hours later, Dr. Hayes met me in the hallway. "We've got it under control, but he needs someone he trusts. He needs to hear a familiar voice." I walked in. Rocco lay there wrapped in white bandages, tiny IV line taped to his paw, oxygen mask rising and falling with weak breaths. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched when I came near. I placed my hand on his chest right above his heart and whispered like a father making a promise, "You're safe now. You're not being left behind again. Do you hear me? I'm right here." Slowly, painfully, slowly, his head shifted toward my hand. A small exhale escaped him, weak but clear, the first sound he'd made in hours. I leaned down until my forehead touched his. "Don't go. You're not fighting this alone." And that was when the healing ritual happened. Not planned, not practiced, just something sacred and instinctive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the new collar I had bought the day before, a simple black strap with a small tag I had engraved by hand, "Rocco, home." I gently removed the old collar crusted with road dust and dried blood, and replaced it with the new one. No one spoke. Only the soft beep of the monitor and Rocco's breathing, steadier now, filling the room. The moment the collar touched his skin, his eyes opened. Slowly, clouded by pain, but shining with recognition. He looked at me. No fear, no confusion, just trust. Then he pushed his head into my hand, harder this time, like he was pulling me closer to say the one thing he couldn't speak out loud. My throat closed, and I swallowed twice before I could manage a whisper. "All right, buddy. Let's go home." And I understood in that single moment that we had crossed into something new. Rocco didn't just survive. He chose to live. He chose me. 4 weeks after the night Rocco almost died in the emergency room, spring drifted into Flagstaff like the first breath after a long sleep, the last bits of snow melting off the cabin roof and falling in clear drops that sounded like a quiet clock counting the start of a new life. I watched them slip down the shingles one by one, feeling something in me soften in the same slow rhythm. Rocco, once the tiny Doberman dragged behind a car like a piece of discarded cloth, now stretched out by the window where the first light of morning laid a soft gold stripe across his growing black and tan coat. And every morning, as I made my coffee, he lifted his head and looked at me with those amber eyes as if to say, "I'm still here. I'm okay." The deep wounds on his belly and legs were healing, and small patches of fur began to cover the scars like time whispering gently, "Go slow. Things change." When he first learned to walk again, each step trembled, every movement cautious as though the ground might betray him the way a human once had. But each passing day gave him a little more certainty. One morning, when I opened the cabin door and the smell of spring pine drifted in, Rocco shook his small ears and stepped onto the porch. He paused, testing the air, letting the light touch a face still carrying the ghost of betrayal. I stood behind him, quiet, waiting. Then he did something I didn't expect. He ran. Not far and not fast, just small determined steps, but they were steps that belonged to the living. His once torn legs tapped against the ground like a heartbeat, returning to its rhythm, and he made a small circle toward the pines before running back to me with his short tail shaking so hard it seemed ready to launch off his body. A laugh broke out of me, a real laugh, the first true one in years. A sound bright enough to fill the whole cabin. I knelt and opened my arms. Rocco crashed into me without a shred of hesitation. He pressed his face into my chest, breathing hard as if saying, "I did it. I'm alive." And I held him tight. In that moment I remembered something I had forgotten long ago. The feeling of being needed, of being trusted, of being loved without condition. Before Roy Maddox moved in next door, this cabin had been too quiet for too long. I used to think that quiet was what I wanted after chaotic life, but now I know the truth. It had been emptiness dressed up as peace, a kind of loneliness so familiar I mistook it for normal. Rocco shattered that silence not with barking, but simply by existing. Some nights after I turned off the lights and lay down, I'd hear him breathing beside the bed. That slow, warm, trusting sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. A creature once abused so brutally he nearly died in the dark, now slept safe under the roof of the man who saved him. And that felt like a miracle. One afternoon, with the sun pouring through the pines in bright amber streaks, I took him outside. He looked at me, then looked down the dirt road leading toward Route 180, the same road that had almost taken his life. I thought he would be afraid, but he wasn't. He walked forward a few steps, inhaled deeply, then turned and ran back to me with eyes bright like two small fires. I knew what he meant. The past doesn't own me anymore. I knelt again and placed my hand over his chest, right where his heart beat strong and steady. "You're safe now," I whispered. Rocco looked up at me as if he understood every word. He leaned his head into my hand, a simple gesture carrying an entire story of rebirth. And I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. That day, I didn't just save a life. I saved myself. Rocco gave me purpose. He gave me hope. He gave me a reason to open my eyes each morning and smile. He is living proof of a truth people forget far too easily. No matter how cruel the world becomes, kindness needs only a single moment to change a life. And sometimes the small creature you rescue, it is the one who heals your heart the most. If anyone ever asks me the most important thing I learned from all of this, I'll say, don't turn away when you hear a small cry. A fragile life might need you more than you'll ever know.